Hi guys, we're going to be reading an article called The New England Colonies, a basic overview. You're going to need your highlighter and your pencil. And I want to encourage you to pause often in this video so that you can make your own annotations and your own highlights, however you're comfortable. You should know how to do that by this point in the year. So I'll go ahead and guide you through it. But again, you should be adding your own annotations, especially because annotations are supposed to show your connections to the content, to what we're reading. So don't just copy what I'm writing, make your own connections. Okay, so we'll begin. We'll go one paragraph at a time. We're going to be learning about those New England colonies. Okay, the New England colonies were the four northernmost colonies, and they're going to list them: Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Those are the four. This region was different from the other regions because small towns and communities were common. Unlike the middle and southern colonies, when New England towns began to grow large, people moved away to form new communities. Okay, so I'm going to put when New England towns began to grow large, people moved away. They wanted to live in small towns. So I'm going to be done with my highlighter for now, and I'm going to make some connections. Northernmost. This is in the far northeast corner of the U.S. And again, guys, you should be making your own connections. If you've ever been to Rhode Island or read a book or seen a movie that takes place in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, here's where you would make those connections, okay? And let's see. So Rhode Island is the smallest state. That's what I know about that. Connecticut reminds me of the word connect. Massachusetts is where Boston is, and I've been there. And New Hampshire is beautiful. I've been there to see the leaves in the fall, and it's so pretty. Now, you don't need to write that if that's not something you know. Okay? Small towns and communities were common. When New England towns began to grow large, people moved away. They wanted only small towns. That's the connection there. So now we'll go on to the second paragraph. Towns were centered around the town common, which was a grassy area in the center of town where citizens' livestock could graze. That's like sheep, cows, pigs, where they could graze on the grass. The center of town also contained the meeting house and artisans' shops. Okay, so livestock could graze there. The meeting house was there, and artisans' shops were there. Okay, I actually want to show you a picture of this. Okay, so this is what the town common looked like. It had a meeting house. This is where they're going to write and vote on laws and elect people, elect officials to town jobs. This is where shops and houses were. And this is where the animals could graze in the grassy area. An artisan is someone, when they say artisans' shops, an artisan is somebody who has a really special talent in something, like they know how to make wigs, or they know how to make barrels or shoes, or they're blacksmiths. That's what that is. So when we look at the town common, towns were centered around the town common, which was a grassy area in the center of town where livestock could graze. Isn't that funny to think about cows, pigs, sheep just out in the middle of the town common? The meeting house was there. That's where we're going to talk about that in a minute. It was very important. And the artisans' shops. That could be people who make wig maker, candle maker. Really anybody. The barrel maker. blacksmith, dressmaker, anybody. That's what an artisan's shop is. So they would have their buildings there where they could sell. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next paragraph. The meeting house was very important in New England towns because that's where new laws and decisions for the town were created there. Because towns were so small, remember that up here? Small towns, and when they started to get big, people moved away. Because towns were so small, all eligible male citizens of the town, male citizens, could join together at the meeting house to vote on new laws. This was a form of self-government. That just means they're governing themselves. They're making their own laws because citizens made laws together and everyone agreed to follow the laws that were created. That should remind you of the Mayflower Compact. Okay, so the meeting house was very important. I actually want to highlight meeting house because that's where new laws were made. Male citizens, you had to be a white male property owner. So think of that. Only the richest white men could vote on new laws and elect people. So, and everyone agreed to follow the laws that were created. That's a good thing. Okay. New England was not the best place to grow crops. We know that, right? From the archaeology dig. The soil was rocky and the climate was too cool to allow for a long growing season. There were plenty of small farms in New England, but these farms existed to feed citizens, not to grow and sell cash crops. So the soil was thin, sandy, rocky, short growing season. They only had a month or two that was warm, and that's not long enough to grow crops. And there were plenty of small farms. They could figure out how to grow in small areas. And they grew food to feed their own citizens, not to grow crops to sell for money. So how did people in New England make a living? How did they make money? They built ships. They captured whales for their blubber. Remember, their blubber is their fat, and the fat helps keep lamps, like gas lamps, lit so they can have light at nighttime. They fished, they cut and sold lumber, and they sold animal furs. Okay, so this is the whole paragraph about how they make money. This is how they make money in New England because they can't sell crops. Okay? And again, guys, I hope you're pausing. I hope you're adding your own annotations. All right? The Puritans were members of a religious group that was spread throughout the New England colonies. The Puritans are going to be really, really important. They're a religious group that was spread throughout New England colonies. Members of this group were strict. Wait till you learn how strict they were, and lived under harsh guidelines. Puritans were a strong influence in the New England colonies. They would often expel, that means send away, people who believed differently. That's terrible. So if a new settler was searching for religious freedom, the New England colonies was not the place to go for religious freedom. So the Puritans, they were very, very, very strict and religious. I'll put a little cross there. They were strict and they had harsh rules for living there. Puritans were a very strong influence in New England colonies. They wanted the rules followed. They would send people away who believed differently than them. That's terrible. And so if you're looking for religious freedom, do not go to the New England colonies. They will not welcome you if you disagree with them. Okay, there were many types of workers in the New England colonies. So we're going to learn what kinds of work they could do. Most workers chose their jobs, like farmers, artisans. Remember those artisans up here? Wig maker, candle maker, barrel maker, blacksmith, Basically, anybody who's making anything, hat maker. Most workers chose their jobs, like farmers, artisans, merchants, people who own stores, and so on. However, not all workers were free to make their own choices. Can you imagine that? Indentured servants, these are not slaves. Indentured servants were usually young adults who chose to sign a contract to work for 5 or 6 or 7 years in exchange for free passage to the New World. So, guys, what these young adults would say is, if I agree to work for you for free in the New World for 5 or 7 or 6 years, it could even be as little as 3 years or as many as 10 years, will you pay for my journey from England to the New World? And a lot of people said, yes, I'll pay for your journey, your food, your clothing, your supplies, as long as when you come and work for me at my house, you work for free for this amount of time. They made an agreement. So it was different from slavery. Slaves never had a choice, and they were not free at the end of these years. You know what I mean? But at the end of the contract, the indentured servants were free to start their own farms. During their contract periods, indentured servants had very few, if any, rights. Very few rights. They had to totally serve the people who had paid for their journey. Slaves, on the other hand, were forced to work for no pay and had absolutely no choices in life. So, all right. Sometimes you could be a farmer. You could be an artisan, a merchant. That means you own a store or a shop. Not all workers were free. So indentured servants signed a contract. This was an agreement. Yes, I'll work for free for you. I'll live at your house. I'll do everything you tell me to do for a certain amount of time. But at the end of that time, I'm free and I can start my own farm. And they didn't have very many rights during the time they were an indentured servant. But slaves, on the other hand, were forced to work for no pay and had absolutely no choices in life. This was an awful life. So sad, full of abuse. Marriages were broken up. Children were torn from their parents and never saw them again. Slave life was awful, and we're going to study more about that. But for now, this is what you should have for the New England colonies. And this is a perfect article for you to study for your upcoming quiz.